So the meeting is on YouTube now. I'm just going to share it everywhere, and we'll start the discussion in a few minutes after we start sharing it. Guys, you don't mind having your face on my social media, right?
Not at all. And Dhruv, shall we all switch off our video, because then it'll show us a blank screen for them and they'll realize that the stream hasn't started.
Yeah, just switch off your video for now, and we'll start. I'm just going to share it now. Okay, guys, so you can turn on your videos now, since we've just gone live, and we're going to start off that. We're just waiting for Harshit and Pranav to turn on the videos, and we're going to start with the questions. Guys, so I think we're ready. I think people are watching now. So the first question we want to ask to the speakers, generally, is how do you feel about social media collecting and processing your data to understand your personality and manipulate consumer expenditure and change your own perspectives? So, if you'd like to speak, raise your hand. Yeah, Harsh, you.
I mean, literally raise my hand. Okay, that's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah, so to be honest, there are two aspects to it, and I'm a little bit torn on the matter, right? So there is one, the overall social media is quite criticized for collecting user data and whatnot. And I do think that there's some part of it that's quite freaky. Like, for example, if you have an Android phone and you say, "Okay, Google," and you've enabled it on your phone, then Google collects and it's uploaded to their cloud any recordings of you saying anything after that. So it has recordings of my voice ever since I've enabled that feature. And that is a bit freaky. I can't lie about it. And that would be incorrect. But at the same time, I find there to be an important distinction that has to be made, right? So one argument that I have an issue with is that it says, oh, authoritarian dictatorships and whatnot can collect data about individuals and violate privacy because of social media. And I think that's quite a shaky argument overall. And that's why I think that some social media might even do well if it goes to China and conforms to China's standards as an authoritarian government. Because at the end of the day, in countries like the United States, where you don't have much access to labor, obviously it's difficult to survey each of your individual citizens. But say India were an authoritarian state, say China being an authoritarian state, there are people who've been doing this before social media or algorithms are doing it in the first place. There are people who can spy on citizens and whatnot. That's why Nazi Germany worked for so long, right? And to say that this is a new invention of social media, I think would be absolutely improper. At the same time, there is also a debate that has to be started of sorts, and I hope we can do this in today's discussion, which is the idea that when I look at Twitter, for example, which I'm not really on, but I've checked once in a while, what's going to pop up on my screen is anything that I will wildly disagree with or I'll wildly agree with. Same for Instagram to some extent, same for most other forms of social media. And I think the fact is that there is a lot of bias that goes into it, right? Even including the fact that there is sometimes people say things on Twitter and online have to be fact checked. There is a lot of bias that creeps in in many of these cases. So, for example, in the United States and in Twitter, it's very Democrat favored, and because of that, a lot of information that's there, a lot of fact checks and a lot of banning of accounts happens to favor certain political opinions. Then in India, there's been this criticism recently by the Congress of Facebook, because there was a lot of manipulation of data to support BJP, because in a lot of cases there were Congress accounts and politicians accounts that were being banned or at least being fact checked a lot. So I think that this entire bias thing has to really be sorted out. And maybe a model like France's might be interesting, where France has taken a very firm stand for free speech and saying that if you want to censor anyone, if you want to say that something's inaccurate, you have to go to the courts. But then again, the issue of knowing or not knowing what is true comes in there, right? Newspapers are being replaced by social media a lot. Bit of a weird thing to consider. I just curious to know what everyone else on this call thinks.
So, Sarah has something to add to this.
Okay, so firstly, the points I disagree with. The point made on the authoritarian form, how social media could be authoritarian and sorts. First of all, let's talk about the Hong Kong security law. Now, one of the major reasons why TikTok was banned in India, which a lot of the youth overlooks, is the fact that all Chinese companies operating out of China, operating internationally, are required to store their data in China. The Hong Kong security law states that any person who has, let's say, violent ideas towards China is allowed to be detained in China, is allowed to be jailed. So even if you have a connecting flight to, per se, Hong Kong to Thailand, right, you can be detained by Chinese authorities for posting against China on social media. So first of all, I don't think that's a shaky argument when you could literally go to jail for putting your opinions up on social media.
If I may just ask in this situation, if that's okay, Sarah, may I just ask you a question here? So in these sort of circumstances, yes, all of this is possible, but under most of these situations, there'd be huge international retaliation under these cases, right? So if someone is completely randomly, say, for example, someone from India goes to China, right? And in a connecting flight, because they've posted something on TikTok before it was banned in India, they posted something that wasn't okay on TikTok, then they were arrested by Chinese authorities. I think that that's a bit of a stretch of the imagination. What I do agree with you on, though, completely, is that, say, for example, I believe there was that video that went around on TikTok of someone criticizing Chinese Uyghur internment camps, right? So stuff like that was censored by the Chinese government because they had control over TikTok. So there I completely agree with you. But I really want to understand where do you think that these sort of things are likely to happen? Like, I haven't seen many examples of it, so I'm just wondering.
Okay, so I would say that given the hostile relations with India and China right now, it is very possible for laws like this to have bias and to be used against Indian citizens. So we shouldn't be saying that the government or the authoritarian Chinese government does not have control over TikTok specifically, which was my point.
I didn't get that.
Okay.
So
I mean that there's obviously going to be bias because of Indian Chinese relationships right now, right?
right.
So that could be used against Indian citizens.
Oh,
And
absolutely. So what do you think we can do about that? I'm actually curious because I
exactly,
agree with you on that.
we did ban TikTok in our country, which doesn't give China access to our data or the data of our citizens, which was what was supposed to happen. So even US was looking to ban TikTok, as all of us know. So that would be a good measure to stop laws like this from affecting citizens of a country.
No, that's fair.
So, how do you guys think they collect this data? Do you think they maliciously track you without your knowledge? Do you think it's possible, like Harsh mentioned, that Android devices record you, like, hey Google, hey Siri? Do you think?
Oh, by the way, I just want to mention that that's actually, I can show you a website because of regulation that Google has to show that, and all the data that they've collected about you, they have it on a website. And if you want, I can send it in a little while after this.
So I think Arnav has something to say.
Yeah, so to build on that point earlier about bias on social media, like there's this case study that I saw earlier on TikTok, and if you post a video on TikTok promoting China or saying something good about China, it's far more likely to be recommended to other users on TikTok and be promoted on TikTok. So that's a clear example of the bias that exists on social media, and this is also shown on other platforms such as Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, where there's bias amongst those big tech firms and the algorithms that are there to check those things. And there's numerous instances of different politicians, just like Arsh said earlier, there's numerous instances of different politicians getting their accounts deleted on social media without any real justification, simply because of their political views. And something that could be done for this is actual human monitoring, because this is an issue that's persisted for a long time, especially in recent times on social media, where lots of people's accounts and they've been silenced online simply because of their views. And my opinion on this is that as long as it's not factually inaccurate and as long as you're not spreading misinformation, there shouldn't be a real reason for you to be censored on social media.
To add on to what Arnav just mentioned, there was this article I read about this bias within Google searches, where the results you get is based on the background. So because Google has the ability to record all your searches and know more about your character, your background, your culture, your religion. Instead, what happens is that Google uses that to provide searches according to you, and it might also create biases. Your may also affect the internal biases. So this one case study was looking at searches for different keywords like beautiful, or when the keyword beautiful was typed, it often showed images of white Americans, and eventually when the ugly or stress was searched, it showed images of African Americans. So Arnold's point is very, very, very valid, and it's related to this. And the one solution that would be possible is introducing or better looking at the algorithms behind these programs. Yes or no?
Yeah. See, there's something that I'm going to play a bit of a devil's advocate here for the current way that social media ads work. So basically, they essentially monitor your patterns, they monitor your preferences, and based on that, usually they give you personalized ads, right? So in a sense, that sometimes is actually convenient to you, because sometimes you're shown products and services that you actually need, and in a sense, sometimes that can be convenient for you. And For example, if you were to say on your Google search, say you were to search for microwaves, all of a sudden out of nowhere on Instagram, on Google, on anything, all your social media, you'll start getting ads for microwaves online. And so in a sense, it can be convenient and it can be useful for you sometimes.
A contrary argument to that would be that when someone's obtaining your information, when someone's able to know what you like and know what you want, it can have a real impact on how you spend your money or the kind of lifestyle you want to live. So what happens? Your decision making process is affected by the program or the algorithm, and for better or worse, you tend to make different decisions. So that's another aspect of what Arnav just said.
All right, so just one thing I wanted to point out here, which I think just for our discussion to continue, because I find this very interesting. I absolutely agree. Like looking at it from an economics perspective, I believe few of the Ivy League universities, Yale for one, I'm certain, did research saying that people who are on social media, a majority of them looked at, searched up products that they wanted to buy on social media. But more importantly, it's that they had worse credit rating, they spent more money overall, things like that. But one thing I just think is important to this discussion, since Harshit, you mentioned the point of figuring out how the algorithm works and ensuring that it doesn't lead to a lot of this bias. And in a sense, I'm in disagreement towards it, because I think personally that there's a little bit of there's part of it that's not very practical, given the fact that what Google does and what a lot of these social media companies do is that they don't make the algorithm completely themselves. They use machine learning, and that tracks what, so say for example, you buy X and you buy A also, right? Next time Adi is searching something about X, then he's most likely to get an advertisement related to A. It's not really based off of what a human believes here. And I get your point, right? Humans intervening. But again, I think that leads to another issue here, which I really would like to know more people's opinions on, which is the fact, say, for example, one of my friends sent me something a little while ago, which is a tweet by Donald Trump, which was speculating, right? I don't think it was entirely accurate and whatnot, but essentially was speculating on how we could solve issues regarding COVID-19 and things of that sort. And the issue is, since we don't really know enough information about it, I think it's unfair to call any of that non-factual or particularly factual. But one of the things that Twitter called tagged to that one particular tweet was that we find that the information in this tweet is inaccurate and Twitter would like to step in. And that shows clear bias, especially given the fact that there are certain political opinions that are being encouraged a lot more on certain platforms. That's even true of Facebook in India, because I think they want to align a little bit with the party that's in power, just so they can get what they want. That a lot of this bias creeps in so-called facts. So I'm not sure that human intervention is helpful here. Like DuckDuckGo is what I actually use for most of my Google searches, what I used for researching any of this. And point is that that's a simple query system that doesn't include what a lot of things that Google includes, but it does lead to bias of its own. So for example, if I search up climate change is a hoax, right? Then the articles that will come up will essentially prove to me that climate change is a hoax, right? And while I don't think that that's great, I think that that's necessary for us to encourage free speech and to at least gain a lot of the advantages of social media without creating these large sort of partisan disadvantages. But I'm curious to know anyone else's opinion.
I agree with you. And Arnav and Adi want to speak. So Adi, go first, and then after that, Arnav.
Yeah, okay. So I know we've been talking a lot about, large ideas such as censorship and all, but I'd like to move our attention a little bit more into a little closer to home about how social media affects how we think as students or how we interact with each other online. So I heard Harsh talking about, for example, he said that on Twitter, it's either something that he strongly believes in, like it's two opposite ends of the spectrum, where he's either something which is strongly, aligned with his viewpoints, and then things which are perfectly, for example, he spends a lot of time thinking about them, especially even if they're not, for example, like even if they're not agreeing with his opinions. So there's a little thing called a little thing I was reading about earlier, especially with relation to social media, is an idea that the things that we search up on social media, the things that we search up on our search engines, are sort of an accumulation of these keywords that form this sort of bubble that we're inside, like this echo chamber, as lots of news media outlets use it, how they term it. So essentially, an echo chamber is where people seek out information that reinforces their existing views, which means that when I search up something on social media, or if I search something up on my search engines, I would get an answer, or I would get a result, or a suggestion which is more closer to my beliefs. As well as, and it is an exercise of confirmation bias. So this is an example of how social media could manipulate what we think or what we sort of consume on a daily basis. And this is actually it's a nifty technique that that social media uses. For example, when we're talking about like the echoing or the homogenizing effect of social media, there are also ideas like cultural tribalism, where you have all of these different groups on social media, like how you guys talked about earlier, that affects it affects how we think, how we search, and also our, the total time that we spend on social media. Since part of the question in hand today was about how we maximize the effects and what are the negative aspects of social media, is that the fact that there is like this echo chamber, which is a group of like-minded people working, like talking about something that kind of reinforces their opinions, increases the time that we spend on social media, and also sort of polarizes our opinions on major topics. I just like to know if you guys what do you guys think about this?
I agree with Adi, and I think that a lot of our conflicts arise because they're not able to understand what the opposite views are, and social media is just increasing difficulty in coming to an agreement between people. So even in world conflicts, different countries may have different opinions, and the reason why some of them are difficult to solve is because different countries have different beliefs, and they are not able to understand each other. So Adi's point is very valid. And
Okay.
I feel that social media is making it more difficult for people to arrive at solutions and communicate better.
Plus, I think I'd like to talk about an example in this situation. In the USA, we've all seen two sides, right? The Republicans and the Democrats. And we've always blamed Donald Trump or the white supremacists for having a hold over the certain population of the United States. So I think that we cannot blame Donald Trump for actually causing that division. That division is, in fact, caused by social media. Social media is the plague that is causing discrimination in a whole country of 33 million people. So, for me, I think that only being exposed to what you want to see makes you isolated from the other side. As Adi said, it creates sort of an echo chamber. So the information you're getting is most likely not the whole truth. So Republicans on social media, for example, they'll post about not wearing a mask, while Democrats will post about attending Black Lives Matter protests. So the Democrats are usually only exposed to information on their side. They never know what the logic behind the Republicans' point of view is, right? So I'm not saying that Donald Trump didn't cause the division between these two groups, but he took advantage of social media to create this division further. So social media is the plague here.
To add to what Sarah just said,
Harshit, before that, Ria has something to say.
yeah.
And after that, Arnav, and then we'll speak.
So to add on to what Sarah said about how social media was mainly what was really affecting the partisan in the United States of America right now, well, I wouldn't completely agree with that because yes, social media is playing a very important role as like Donald Trump, the president at the moment, is like tweeting every couple of hours, but it's mainly how the media reports it, and that's what really influences and that takes higher precedence over social media. So yes, there might be a couple of biased opinions out there, but when you use a specific platform, you know what you're getting into. You know that they're going to be there's a variety of ideas out there, variety of opinions out there, and you choose to get into that even after knowing it. So from there, it's more about what you do and what you decide to look at, what you decide to believe. So it's not, yes, social media might be a plague. Yes, it might be affecting us a lot mentally, but it's also about what you as an individual are actually deciding to believe after that.
Okay, so the first thing I'd like to say is that
Playing from Harshchit's iPad.
a lot of kids our age are only exposed to news from social media. How many of us sit at home, watch the news every single day, and collect information? A lot of us collect information from Instagram posts. You cannot say that media is the highest influential power. No, it isn't. Otherwise, half of the youth in our country would be supporting BJP. So, what we need to talk about is the age people our age are getting their information from biased
One second.
sites
Just
and
a second. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but that's
Yes,
a
Harsh.
sudden figure that you've popped up, right? So A, saying that half our youth would support the BJP, and B, that implying that half our youth don't support BJP, which are both statements that are very difficult to qualify, very difficult to judge.
Yeah, Sarah, there's a
think
certain bias in that statement. So
That's okay also.
Yeah.
I think that's
yeah, it's
perfectly
fine. That's
but-
your view. So yeah, and Adi had something to say. Harsh,
Yeah. So I just
can
wanted
you
to
finish your point,
understand
or
Tara's view on that. That's all.
yeah, after Adi, Arnav's going to speak. So Adi, what were you going to say?
Yeah. So I mean, like for the past like 3 4 because we've been talking a lot about how social media in general has been like the factor that is causing all of this. Like we've been talking about apart from censorship, but we've been talking about how about the social media algorithms and what we see and the echo chambers and all of that. But another point that I'd like to introduce is that social media is just as much as the people who use social media, because otherwise it doesn't make social media social. Because without the users, social media isn't really it isn't effective and it doesn't do its purpose. So, like a theory that I'd like to come up with here is that, especially since we're going to be talking about how social media affects us physically, emotionally, and how it affects our screen time and how much we spend on social media. I think like I like to introduce is a certain theory called the uses and gratification theory, which which aims to explain why we interact with mass media like we do. So there's something called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a group of needs that people.
Yeah, Adi. So,
Yeah, sorry.
no, continue, Adi. You just
Yeah. So there are these certain something like self-esteem, self-actualization, and things like that that people seek to achieve at some point in their life or at some point. And a certain theory that has come up with in this users and gratification theory is that people go to social media to seek these to satisfy these needs. For example, like there are like these five main things. There are five main reasons, according to this theory, as to why people use social media. One is cognitive needs, one is affective needs, one is personal integrative needs, social integrative needs, as well as tension-free needs. So these are the like five main reasons why people use social media. And it's not that we're doing any favors to ourselves. For example, especially when Sarah's talking about all of the data that we spread to each other and how there's been a bias and all of that. I think that that especially with concepts such as making content virality, or making pseudo communities, or even having parasocial interactions with celebrities and things like that, it doesn't really do us favors in terms of how much time we spend on social media and the effect it has on us. Because at the end of the day, we are still doing stuff like having a relationship, a one-way relationship with different members on social media, or we have these pseudo communities that discuss different ideas, which kind of align with our beliefs. We still make content viral, which is done by us. It's not done by Instagram, who put it everywhere. It's by us, who like the videos, who comment on it. And it's the reason why some people have 250 million views, as opposed to how much time we would spend if for example, let's just take TikTok, for example. Like, the reason we use TikTok is because how viral it is and how much people like it in general, not really about how much we like it. It's just about how popular it is in general. So I just think that we're not doing us any favors in this purview. So if you guys agree or disagree, please, I'd love to hear your opinion.
I believe Arnav wanted to say something right now, right?
Yeah, sorry.
yeah, Arnav,
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
ahead.
So going back on Sarah's point about how we get our information, it doesn't just stem from social media itself. It doesn't stem from social media itself. It stems from the biases that exist in the information we receive. It has nothing to do um, with how exactly these social media sites work. It's more about how the different. Well, it's think of it like this. On social media, you have these different communities, and in these communities, you have certain views, and oftentimes it doesn't leave that whole plane of thought. For example, if you were on Facebook and you were in a group about why cats are the best pet as opposed to why dogs are the best pet, your mind will be constantly fed opinions and reasoning as to why you're right, why you're always right, and how everyone else who thinks that cats are the inferior pet or whatever are wrong. And this limits us as a society. As a society, we want to be able to grow and come up with new solutions. And coming up with new solutions requires different perspectives, and that's something that's limited on social media. And so, something that could be done to solve this is, you know, trying to encourage different groups to interact with each other. Like, say you randomly send an invite to someone on some random group or a group of people to another group. So say you have a group about why cats are the best pet and a group about why dogs are the best pets. You can have a few people randomly dispersed to another group, and it promotes uh, an opportunity for people to be able to build on their opinions, build on their thoughts, and hopefully, come to new solutions, come up with new ideas, and come up with new perspectives on different issues in the world.
So what Arnav mentioned was quite interesting, and I have something very insightful to add. So he mentioned how the bias is because of the people, and because people don't really get to know about other opinions. So what we could do is, what we potentially could do is educate people about these different aspects, because not everyone knows that social media is collecting data. Not everyone knows that social media is doing all of this. So when people are given information like this, they could expand their horizons. So that was one solution I thought of.
Yeah, so Harsh had something to add, and after that, Sarah, you may speak.
So one thing that, like, first of all, we've been talking about quite a few topics as of now. So few things, right? So first of all, we began this sort of discussion after looking at the basic economics of it. We spoke about what is essentially this term called cyber balkanization. And to put it in a more crude way, that if you're okay with it, Dhruv, it's essentially a sort of circle jerk where everyone is agreeing with everyone else and they're all sitting around in a circle. And I won't go on from there. But
Yeah, Harsh, I wouldn't recommend it.
yeah. But the idea is that in terms of social media, there is, as Adi pointed out, a beauty to it in some senses, which is that while the algorithm bases itself in this particular way, because we all like to talk to people we agree with, which is obviously very nice. I got like some 300 and something likes on the last post I made. I don't even use Instagram very often, but if 300 people liked something I said or something I posted in real life, that would, as in a very primal side of me, feel very, very good. So again, it is very much based around human nature. And one interesting way to look around it is that, say, for example, personally, and this is completely anecdotal, but I believe it makes sense logically, which is that since YouTube, for example, wants me to watch more videos, the more I, say, for example, look at those destroy videos online, the more I get those recommended on my home screen. The fewer destroy videos I look at I watch on YouTube, and the fewer videos I watch of one particular perspective, the fewer of them I'll see on my screen. Same with any personal preferences, hobbies, things of that sort. So overall, I absolutely agree with what Adi has mentioned, and even what Harshit has mentioned to some extent, which is that we do really need to understand that our changes in our behavior as a society, our culture as a society, does matter a lot in many of these circumstances. And to highlight that point, I'd just like to bring up one example. So we've all been speaking a little bit about the US in this particular discussion. We've been talking about how it's very polarized, X, Y, Z. But when looking at a little bit beyond our bubble, right, within India itself, there is a very interesting trend that I've seen. First of all, it's that Narendra Modi, and so Shashi Tharoor before him, but Narendra Modi essentially has the most followers on Twitter for any Indian politician ever, right? Now, that's obviously not very surprising since he's one of the latest big politicians out there. But what's very fascinating is that as social media, as we have the advent of social media, as say, for example, Android phones are essentially quite cheap because Google gives them out. Google gives out the Android software for companies to build on. And essentially, because far more Indians have access to things like social media, have access to so many of these things, there's a lot more the data is being shared far better, and this kind of goes back to an idea which I Adi mentioned and Arnav also mentioned, which in a weird sense is all about memes, right? So primarily and as we grew as humans and whatnot, we weren't the strongest or anything of that sort, but the one thing that set humans aside was the ability to socialize, A, and B, to share ideas that we believe in. So fire was one of these ideas. So amusing as it might be, fire was technically a meme, right? And being able to share so-called memes, so-called ideas and whatnot on social media is a huge advantage. And I'd really like to hear more people's opinions on the advantages of social media, not just the disadvantages and how to minimize them, but also the advantages and how to maximize them in a lot of these circumstances. That could mean changing our culture as a society. That could mean introducing social media to people at a different age. Could mean anything. I'm really curious to know what everyone thinks.
So before Sarah, you have been recognized to speak. After that, Arnav, and then we'll be moving on. Actually, no, Adi, and then we'll be moving on to the next question that we've brought forward. So yeah, sorry, you've been recognized.
Last thing I'd like to say is that I think that the disadvantages of social media completely outweigh the advantages of social media. The first thing would be addiction. We can't say that no one here is aware of the disadvantages of social media. There is a whole Netflix documentary on what social media can do to you called The Social Dilemma, which is made available to millions of people, right? Yet 2.77 billion people choose to use Instagram every single day. So this arises the point that how can someone be so addicted to something that even after knowing that our data is being sold for profit, we still go ahead and look at that app every single day, first thing in the morning. The second thing I'd like to say is brainwashing. A basketball player was brainwashed by YouTube to believe that the earth was flat. He made that statement on international television non-sarcastically. And the reason after that, he apologized a month later, saying that he actually went down a YouTube rabbit hole and he watched around 20 videos, which told him and explained to him logically why the earth was flat. So the third and the most important point that I'd like to raise is mental health. Is inherent capitalism more important than the suicide rates that have been increasing of this generation?
Sarah, before you go on to that, the next question is based on that. So, can you save your points for that? Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Were you adding another point? Okay, so
can you mention what your opinion on this is, bro? Because you stayed silent for a little bit. Curious.
So what I think about this is that we know, like many of you have said, we know what happens when you go on social media. We know what we're getting into, what terms we're signing, what we're agreeing to. We're agreeing to let these corporations see what we like and what we don't like, and what could interest us and what we could purchase. Like, it's our own problem and it's our own fault. And the only solution to this is what I think we can do is just not believe everything we see on social media. Trust more news sources. Maybe watch the news, like Sarah said, read the newspapers, and not be so gullible. We shouldn't really advertise ourselves on social media. As since Adi has mentioned Maslow's needs, self-esteem, we shouldn't really try to let our personal lives mix in with social media. As hard as it sounds, it's what the truth is. And that is my view on this, Harsh.
Yeah, just adding to the whatever point we were talking about. Social media is basically manipulating us. That's what I think. And people have got so much addicted. though Sarah was mentioning about the movie Social Dilemma on Netflix, I watched the movie, and for 5 minutes I had the effect of the movie, and the next thing I heard the notification symbol, then I just go in there. That's how I've been caught up with Instagram, and people have been they have started posting stories about them going to buy eggs. I mean, who asked? They're just addicted, and at this point of time, they don't even know what they're doing. Okay, so they randomly start posting stuff where no one asked them. Dude, I don't want you. I don't want to know if you're going to buy eggs or not in the morning at 6 o'clock. Okay, so it has gotten into our brains like fully, and it's basically controlling us. Even I see, to be honest, I haven't been out of social media for more than 1 week. That's all I think. So, it's kind of not in a very good state of position.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, Pranav. So we'd like to move on to the next question which we have. Do you think social media has affected one's perception of how they feel about themselves, and could it lead to social insecurity? Yes, you may speak, Pranav.
okay. So,
And after that,
um,
Arnav, you've been recognized. So
so as I was saying, this is what happened in my life. So in 8th grade, I posted some post, and people started, commenting something which I didn't feel great about. Okay, so I felt very bad about it. That got me. I was not. I was sad for at least 1 week. I stopped talking to people where like I'm usually very active. Okay, so they just you mean it's whatever we do on social media is totally affecting us. It's totally affecting someone, and we just don't know. We don't know what they are going through, and we just randomly go into someone's post and we say, "Oh, you look like an idiot." Sorry for the informed knowledge, but that's what people do, right? So it's totally affecting us. That's what I'm trying to say.
yeah, understood, Pranav. Arnav, you wanted to say something, and then after that,
Could you repeat what the guiding question was again?
oh, do you think social media has affected one's perception of how they feel about themselves and how it could lead to social insecurity?
Yeah, can I speak now?
Yeah, you can speak. You can speak, Arnav.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I have this friend. They posted something on social media, and the responses on social media were quite negative. They were very critical, and they felt, their self-esteem was shot. They went through a very short spell of what I would say was depression, where they were very inactive on social media. They seemed a bit off, and this is a problem with social media. Where people can be affected very easily by what's said on social media, and it can have a very profound psychological effect. We've seen so many instances of people committing suicide due to cyberbullying and due to being, criticized essentially in a malicious intent on social media. And obviously this is terrible for us, as a society. We shouldn't be promoting, or we shouldn't be, promoting a platform where stuff like this can happen, where people are put in a position where they feel as though they aren't worthy, or they're they don't mean anything. And there's so many people who have committed suicide, just in recent times. So many people have, committed suicide due to cyberbullying and due to being shamed online. And this is a real problem. We need to find some solutions, and some of them could be, tighter monitoring and more restrictions on what's being commented on, and what's being said towards other people, because it shouldn't be like this, where we're seeing a growing number of people who are getting cyberbullied online, a growing number of people who are feeling depressed and are seeing themselves have, psychological issues because of what's going on social media. And it's definitely something that we need to try and find solutions for. And as I said earlier, one of those solutions could be more restrictions on social media to try and prevent stuff like this from happening.
Yeah, no, that was really insightful, and it's what the reality is. So, Adi, you've been recognized. Well, is there anything you'd like to say?
No, I think Ria raised her hand before
What?
Hey, we can't hear you, Adi.
We can't hear you, Adi. Is there
Oh,
anything to say?
can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah, Adi.
I think Ria raised her hand before I did. I think she can.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, Ria.
Okay, thank you. Just to add on what Arnav said, it's like social media is feeding off your vulnerability, and you cannot deem whether you're mentally stable enough to be getting out there, and you have hundreds and thousands of people commenting on what they feel about you, what they think about you, what their perception of what you post and your opinions are. So it's more of like when you go into in real life, you're interacting with a bunch of people, you're going to feel exhausted. It's the same thing, but it's online, it's virtual, and you're not seeing those you're not seeing the magnitude of people around you, and you feel exhausted. And this might be an unpopular opinion, but say for example, take quarantine. A lot of us have felt exhausted, and it's mentally affected us. Well, social media, it has this kind of grip on you, like you know it's wrong, but you keep going back to it. And the fact that people you know are on it too just makes you come back to it. Even when you want to take a break, you can't, because you have so many people pressurizing you to come back. You have so many messages left unread on a platform like, say, Instagram. And then later you're being put down for not responding to them on time because you wanted to take a break. See, this is what social media does. It uses you. It's why you're called users, you're not called customers. You don't say I'm a customer of Instagram, you say I'm a user of Instagram, because it basically uses you to to give them a more of a gain on their company. They don't look at you as a user. They're not trying to profit you, they're not trying to make you feel better. So it's a very unpopular opinion, and it can be contradicted, so I'm open to anything anyone has to say against it.
Right, and absolutely. I think the key part there is that I don't want to say much because I think you said pretty much all of it, Ria. But essentially, the key part there is that we aren't the customer; we're the product in this case, and it's our data that's being sold in this case. And I think that while advertising does, I mean, it is a huge industry and it has benefited a lot from the advent of social media. There are a lot of advantages to it, and we do technically consent to using social media. Your point is absolutely made that, okay, if my friends are on it, I really feel like, excuse me, I really don't enjoy Instagram either. But essentially, the situation remains that it's more like a drug rather than a completely consensual situation here. And I think that's interesting to investigate. But Adi, you wanted to say something, right?
Yeah. So, you guys have been talking about how social media has affected us, especially when we're talking about how people comment on your posts and so on and so forth. I completely agree with that, but at the same time, I feel that it still comes down to, especially even when in the past discussion where Sarah was talking about how people have influenced and brainwashed people. I just don't feel that the onus can be put on social media for almost for stemming that. I feel that I mean it can to some extent, but I still feel that the users who use social media should be held responsible, especially when we're talking about things like brainwashing and like
Right. Then
influencing.
Adi, I have a question. So again, this is a weird line, and I really don't know what we should do here. I don't think any of us are going to come up with a solution miraculously in this discussion. But my question for you is, like, say for example, drugs. If someone does heroin, right? They're addicted to heroin. It's technically their fault, and I get where you're coming from, right? Like if you consent to something and you agree to it, and you can't prosecute someone for allowing you to do it. But if I'm addicted to something, then some regulation might be necessary just to protect my monkey brain, essentially, right? Don't you agree? Or what do you think the line is?
I get what you're saying. I completely get that. But especially when I'm talking specific to Sarah's point about how people have been influenced by others on social media, especially when like on YouTube. I don't know. I don't. Think she said like athlete was brainwashed to believe a certain theory, right? um, I agree to the fact of how like the whole natural side of addiction of how social media has pulled us into this this bubble where we can't the red notifications, the unlimited scrolling has sort of put us in this thing where we can't move out. But think about it. You telling someone something on social media, is the onus put on social media, or is the onus on you? For example, if you send a message to someone, a hurtful message to someone on social media, is the responsibility of that message put on social media or you?
No, absolutely. That's a very good point, actually, because in a lot of these circumstances, like, people are mean, right? And they're even more mean when you, like, I won't say anything mean to you right now, but the chances of me saying something mean to you, if I were to talk to you on a YouTube comment section, increase exponentially, right? And the more distant it seems, the more likely any of this is going to happen. So I guess that is an aspect to consider, which is that humans automatically go to this whole tribal state. But at the same time, you can't really blame social media for any of that, because they're just trying to make money.
Yeah, just one more thing. Another thing to, especially when we're talking about how social media affects us mentally and physically, I think that's definitely a huge argument as to why social media has been more detrimental than beneficial. But and especially when we're talking about how there's been studies that social media has been linked to increase in anxiety, increase in depression. I mean, I can quote a billion sources, but another thing to add, especially with the positive elements of social media, I think honestly, personally, I feel that I think I'm slightly more informed, especially with, I know that out of the 100, say that there's 100% of the data that I see on social media, at least say that 70% of, say, are memes that I really don't, that I just browse on and spend most of my time on. There's at least that 20 or 25% of things that I actually learn that I might not have learned if I wasn't connected to social media. So I just think that although we've been talking so much about all of the problems that social media brings us, I still think that even things like, I feel that I'm far more, at least a little bit more informed about world events. I'm more informed uh, about even like, it allows communities to voice out themselves when they normally can't. It helps communities, especially like marginalized communities or disenfranchised communities. It allows them to kind of reach out to a global stage so people actually get to know about them. I've learned about so many, especially when we're talking about these very touchy cases in India. I was most informed by this, especially when people were talking about it in social media, especially when people are talking about it on YouTube. That's where I got a lot of my information from. Although it could be biased or things like that, I had a
Just a second, Adi. I was wondering something. I don't know if I might answer
Harsh,
the question, but I just want
Harsh,
to ask. Oh, okay. Yeah.
we're not permitting questions on this, what Adi said here, because Sarah has been waiting for a bit to,
Oh, okay,
quite
okay.
a while to speak.
My bad.
So we'll, Sarah, you've been given permission to speak, and after that we can let you ask Adi his questions after this, okay? If there are no questions for Sarah.
Okay, so the first thing I'd like to say is that when you say that we should be blaming people for being mean on social media, let's say there's an influencer, yeah? So a person texts the influencer something mean, but the influencer doesn't take it to heart. So when that happens, I'm sure we've all seen social media ads. There are literally ads on social media about how to get a slimmer waist, where to get rhinoplasty. So when you come in contact with stuff like that after receiving hateful messages, after being told that you're not good enough, and you're looking at advertisements on how to fix something that you can't even control, you can't say that only that person is responsible for affecting the other person's mental health. Um, Another thing that I would like to say is we've all seen the increase in suicide rates of this generation. Now, one thing that we should be taking into account is that our generation is one of the generations which is the earliest to get on social media. So right now, kids who are 8 years old, 10 years old are on social media. They are exposed to information that we would have been exposed to at 15 years of age or 20 years of age, right? And another point that Adi made was that he is more informed. Now, there's obviously bias, right? There's no denying bias isn't even a question, but that's when misinformation comes into play. An example that I would like to give was in 2018. Yes, there was a news that there was a man and he was beat by the police continuously and made to say Jai Shri Ram, right? That was the piece of information that was posted on social media and it went viral. Everyone was reposting it. Now, when we talk about the police report actually said that the man was a stalker following a girl, and that's when the police arrested him. So this isn't bias. This is complete misinformation that you are being exposed to. Another thing, you get to know about more communities. Well, a case in 2019 tells us that there were around 20 people pretending to be Native American and spreading misinformation about the Native American community. So instead of educating yourself through Instagram, I think we should look at books. We should look at articles from actual human beings who know what they're talking about, rather than look at posts on Instagram from people who we don't even know. That's all.
Ria, do you have a question for Sarah, or do you like to add on? Or? Okay, so go ahead.
I completely agree with what half of what Sarah said. That yes, that the information that we seem to perceive on social media might not be 100% true, but I don't think it's completely practical that we move into books and newspapers. Yes, it's completely reliable and it's far better than looking at reposts on Instagram. But is it practical? That's the question. We're moving into completely technological age, and that does not really involve majority of us who actually look at newspapers. We spend more time on our phones than we actually do on books or newspapers or any sort of news platform. So I just want to put that out there.
Okay, so the first thing I'd like to say is, how is technology affecting India right now? Technology is actually backtracking our economy, right? We've been getting machines to do the labor, that's something that manual labor could do. We, instead of giving jobs to people who require jobs, we're giving the machines worth millions of dollars. We're spending money on those machines for lesser productivity in some cases, right? So, yeah. Okay, so another thing, so AI is actually entering India. It's lowering our employment rate, and we're giving our jobs to AI. That's the main cause here, right? So I'm not saying that we completely stop using technology. Look at how technology is impacting certain fields, right? So I'm not saying that we should stop using Instagram for our news. I'm saying that maybe we should look at actual journalists, reporters, newspapers in some cases, books, articles. There is so many sources where you can get your information from, which is not biased, which is not posted or reposted by somebody.
So I feel like a lot of people have questions for you, Sarah. I think Adi, Harsh, Arnav, and Pranav all want to say something. So
I'll go second.
So I think Arnav, you go first, then Harsh, then Adi, or Arnav, Adi, and then Harsh, and then Pranav.
Sarah, I firstly I'd like to say that I mostly disagree with what Sarah said. So Sarah mentioned that this unemployment arises because we're replacing labor with machinery, with expensive machinery. And yes, that's true. There is unemployment that arises because of this, but this is a good unemployment. It shows that India as a country and the economy of India is progressing to a state where non-skilled labor, manual labor, something that's generally seen as something of the past, is getting replaced by something that's for the future, that's going to be better in the long run. It encourages us as a society, and it encourages the Indian economy, the Indian workforce, to further their skills, to divert away from the ways of old and find new, skills to be thorough with, and new things to specialize in. And it promotes growth as opposed to hampering the Indian economy. And something that's good about social media, and that's something that that most of us, don't realize, is that social media has resolved a lot of problems. You look back at the incident with the cat killer in Canada. His name is, I think, Luca Mignata, where a group of people on Facebook got together, essentially Facebook detectives, and work with the local police in different countries to track down a killer who killed not just cats and animals, but also murdered a man. And in the end, they were able to trace down the man. And due to the work that was done on social media by people who work together on social media to track where this guy was based on what he posted, they were able to catch someone who not only harmed animals but also harmed people. And so there's a lot of good that can be done on social media that's getting completely overlooked. And although there are some downsides, of course, to social media, of course, we don't like our information being, so open to these companies and being, I guess, monitored in the sense. But it's good that the world can become a better place with social media around.
Okay, so firstly, I agree with the fact that yes, with AI, we will be progressing as a country. But is our country ready for that progression? We have 1.33 billion people in this country, and 70% of us are illiterate. So you expect all of those people to leave their labor jobs, which are replaced by machines that cost millions of dollars, and get educated at the age of 40, 50, 60. That is what you're saying. So yeah, of course, we need to progress with AI in the future, not in the soon future, but in the later future, we will progress with AI. But our country is not ready for that right now. Right now, we're a socialistic country. We aren't inherently capitalistic like US is, neither are we meritocratic. So what we should be working on is providing people who are below the poverty line, can't even afford food. We should be providing them jobs. We should be helping them out in some way, rather than spending millions of dollars on machines. Next up, social media helped discover the cat killer. So what I know about the cat killer is that he used to murder cats, record them, post them on social media. If social media didn't exist, he wouldn't have a platform to post the videos on. He wouldn't get the adrenaline rush of killing the cat, taking a video of it, and then posting it. So yeah, if social media didn't exist, he probably wouldn't be killing cats.
So, Sarah, I would like to ask you a point as a moderator here. Why do you think we're not? You think we're not ready because we have an older population that is bigger than most other countries, right? So you think that they will lose their jobs and they won't be able to sustain themselves? Is that what you're saying?
Firstly, yes, of course, that is a part of what I'm saying. Another thing is, with a larger population, will we be able to accommodate so many people in educational institutions for free, because they're literally below the poverty line? They physically cannot afford to go to school unless the government opens more and more and more schools, right? So with the older population, larger population, and we can't do it right now. We can do it in the future, but not right now.
So, that's I disagree with that personally, saying that we're not ready yet, because if we don't automate, then there are certain how do you think AI is made, Sarah? Which industry do you think it's part of? That industry is going to be lacking because you think we're not ready yet, because the older population is not ready to retire. And where does that put the younger population? In 20 years, you're going to be saying, why didn't we automate then? We could have helped the younger population. We're going to remain unskilled if we don't automate. So when one industry dies, another industry comes out.
May I just interrupt this for a second? If that's
Yeah,
okay?
go ahead.
So
yeah.
first of all, before we go on to anything else, fact that we're having like a respectful discussion, very much unlike a lot of social media, is quite nice to have here. Right? We are talking a lot, we are discussing a lot and whatnot, but I don't see any personal vendetta in this group, right? So it's much nicer. I like to have a civilized conversation, even with, say, in some cases I agree with Arnav and Sarah. In some cases I disagree with Arnav and Sarah, and it's great that we're able to talk about it like this without having to scream at each other in 150 characters or whatever. But as for the points that Dhruv, you mentioned, Arnav and Sarah, I just wanted to step in here because I think that we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, especially since we're looking at AI and automation and machinery and replacing jobs and creating jobs and the lack of jobs, and like there's a huge set of like an absolute farrago of arguments, of assertions, of all sorts of things that's brought up here. So I just want to clarify a little bit. First of all, when we're talking about automation and machinery and things like that, there's a huge range of it. So let's look at, for example, the most basic form of machinery that, say, for example, the current government has been trying to encourage for a little while, which is in agriculture, the use of machinery helps a lot. So, for example, I get a tractor rather than go and plow the fields myself or with a bull. And essentially, I am able to do more work. And basically, I'm able to make more money because I'm able to sell the same. I'm able to do less work. I don't have to hire as many people in that situation. And essentially, skilled labor grows in a lot of these circumstances. As countries develop, you essentially have fewer people working in these primary sectors, which is like your agriculture, your mining, and things like that, which are honestly not very skilled labor. And it slowly progresses towards far more skilled labor. So within Chennai, this has happened in a lot of cases, especially with OMR and the IT sector and things like that, which is progression towards the secondary, tertiary, and quaternary sector. Quaternary is the name for technology and information technology.
Yeah, Harsh.
Right. So given that, I think that to say that automation and AI and this and that are going to steal jobs, well, I think it's an important debate to have. I think it's very sudden for us to debate all of them as though they're one thing. Right. I do think that, for example, artificial intelligence, in some cases, India might not be ready for. In certain places, it really can be disadvantageous because you lead to a huge amount of unemployment, especially given the current situation, the pandemic, lockdowns, and things like that. But there are also a lot of cases where, say, for example, let's look at medicine, which is the place which is probably least controversial in these situations. If I am to say, okay, let's buy a ventilator, nobody is going to say that's going to steal jobs. They're going to say that's going to make you more effective and mean that fewer people actually have to do the same job, right? And that argument, I think, must be considered as much as AI and automation and whatnot, because India is very different from a lot of these developed countries. India is very different from, say, for example, the US and whatnot. And it does have some threats, but there are fewer threats in certain areas too, which I think must be considered. Then the next thing which I think we should look at, and eventually by the end of this discussion or even after it, is this idea that the media, right? The media, which can involve, like, say, the mainstream media, as people say, on TV and the newspapers and whatnot, the idea that they aren't social, right? I think that there is a spectrum in all of these circumstances. So, for example, Arnav and I have a Twitter war of sorts, right? And it's both of us conversing with each other and with whoever follows us. I don't really understand Twitter very well. But in terms of the mainstream media, the word that I've heard about it is for YouTubers and for news agencies and whatnot, is it's a parasocial relationship. It's a one-way social relationship. One person is expressing their opinions, the other person is not able to reply, is not able to give any reactions, things like that. And I think that those also have their disadvantages. And so to say that social media is alone to blame here, I think is absolutely improper. And not just to play the devil's advocate or anything like that, but in reality, while I don't personally use social media a lot, I think it does bring a hell of a lot of benefits that far outweigh its negatives. And some of those, since Dhruv wanted me to bring up an economic perspective here, some of those in terms of the economy, I think are incredibly vital to understand, right? First of all, let's look at funding for a lot of new businesses. So first, let's look at obviously the Obama campaign, which was almost entirely funded through social media and crowdfunding. Please don't quote me on that, but my understanding is that a lot of it was crowdfunded. Then beyond that, let's look at startups and things of that sort. So essentially, you have one person with a really nice idea, and there are people funding it from the other side of the world. There are some incredible ideas which wouldn't otherwise get funding if you didn't have people all around the world getting access to it. I'll give you an example of this. So there's this man called Boyan Slat. We can look it up after this or even during this if you'd like, Dhruv. Boyan Slat, who essentially after graduating from university, he didn't go do a master's or anything of that sort. He said that he wanted to work on the problem of garbage within the world, right? So he wanted to tackle the issue of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And a few years ago, he said that in 5 years or 10 years, I want to reduce its size by 50%. It's a huge goal. And for that, and in that light, his whole argument was, I'm going to build a machine. And he is building it and did build a lot of it. I'm going to build a machine by which we can collect garbage, recycle it, and essentially make a profit off of it. Now, this is the sort of company, this is the sort of idea which most likely it wouldn't have been funded if not for something like social media. But this one little boy in some of the Scandinavian countries, essentially an idea that he thought of when he was 14 years old, the reason that it came to fruition and he got millions of dollars of funding from throughout the world was because of social media. And I think that's very much undercut when we have these petty disputes on social media in a lot of these cases, and that's something that we need to consider. And in that light, I'm very much someone who supports markets with regulation, of course, but I do support markets and competition and whatnot. And social media just automatically increases a lot of this competition. Like we've spoken about how authoritarian dictatorships can use social media to their advantage, but there are a lot of cases where one little bit of access to social media can just completely it can undermine authoritarianism so much, because you're essentially open to new ideas, memes, as we had spoken about earlier, just more things to look at. And I think that that form of competition must be encouraged in a lot of these circumstances, even if, and I completely concede this fact that even though I personally don't feel it too much, there are enough friends of mine I know that face high amounts of anxiety and whatnot through social media. I think that if we as a society try to maximize its benefits in a cultural manner rather than in this regulatory manner, it could make a huge difference overall. But I'm curious to know everyone else's opinion.
I
think, yeah.
to talk about that, I think taking that into account, Instagram shouldn't be the idealistic platform to promote economic engagement or funding, whatnot. We have so many other platforms that collect lesser data, which are more professional, such as LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn, without being inherently trying to make money, giving you ads, all of that, it lets you connect with other people. It is based purely for economic purposes, purely for business purposes, or funding. And there are so many funding websites where you can actually just go ahead and look up websites and whatnot. So I think that the solution, or to increase engagement between businesses and whatnot, would be to create a platform that is solely meant for it. And
just a second there, Sarah. LinkedIn does run ads. I just verified it. It does run ads, and that's part of its model.
Okay, so then I'd say that to get businesses to interact with each other better, we should be creating a platform which is non-profitable and thinks more about the users of the platform than using the users as a product.
I have something to say about that. You mentioned running a non-profit business.
Harshit, after you speak, we're going to move on to another question, since me and you both think that this has been exhausted and the question we presented has been exhausted, and we'd like to finish with that. So yeah, go ahead. This is the last speech on this topic.
That running as a non-profit would be better. However, being in a profitable business, being in a public sector business is what increases competition, is what makes the product better. And if the quality of the product is not there, or if the experience is not there, or people are not going to be using that product. So that's a very valid.
Well,
Adi, you're the last speaker for this. After this, we're going to the next.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's fine. I can move on.
Adi, we can't hear you, a little far away.
Okay, so no, it's fine. Well,
Yeah.
First thing is, I'm not quite sure how and why we brought up the fact about how machinery is affecting Indian economy and how it increases unemployment. I'm not sure how it came to that, but because we were talking about social media, and suddenly we were talking about how India is not ready for economic development. But anyway, just to clarify that point, I feel that about Sarah's point about how I'd rather not go into it now. I think we can move on to the next topic, and then I can.
Yeah, understood, Adi.
I'll address your next point.
So the last topic is about identity crime. So do you think people's data available to everyone may lead to identity theft or other crimes? This is a general question to all of the speakers.
I think that comes with any social platform. I feel that identity theft and all that comes with every social media platform that there is. You will find that bad egg in a group where there are people who are looking to catfish. There are people looking to, all of the malicious data ways that people could use your data, like fishing, farming, and whatnot. I mean, I could name many more, but I feel that that just comes with. You're always going to find that, regardless of how safe your social media platform is, or how well you maintain it, or how less ads there are, or how, I mean, that's going to come with anything. And I just don't think that it's something that we could it's something we can definitely talk about, but I just don't think it's something that we can act upon or something that we can find a solution for. Because when we're looking at things like because there are always going to be accounts that are like that do this. There are always going to be those accounts, and there's nothing that we can talk about them. We can talk about how it affects, for example, if someone catfished us, how it affects our mental health or something on those lines. But I still feel that I feel that it's something that it's always going to persist, whether you're on LinkedIn or whether you're on Instagram or whether you're on YouTube, and it's going to be it's an inevitable problem that you have with social media and being in any community online.
Hey, I think I'm going to sound silly right now after this nice speech that Adi has made, but I really don't mean to be funny here, Dhruv. What exactly do you mean by identity theft here? Because I don't get to what extent you're looking at it. So there are some cases where you can pose to be someone else in front of a bank. There's catfishing. There is having an account in someone else's name on social media. There's all sorts of things. And
So what we mean is using someone else's identity for any personal gain on social media. So let's say you get catfished, you steal something from someone, personal gain in any context. So do you agree with what Adi said, or do you have anything else to add on to it, Harsh?
The same thing. I just don't think that. I think that the same thing can happen offline, and I think that the effects of it offline are, for example, using someone's credit card because it's their idea, or using it for personal gain.
So the question I wanted to ask here was: do you think it's more drastic on social media, or do you think it's more effective on offline, as you say?
Well, personally, I'm of the opinion that 100% it is more drastic on social media given our current circumstances. But at the same time, I do believe that it's improved quite a bit, right? So ideas of in terms of, say, for example, reporting accounts is something that's been introduced as much as we like to think that, hey, that's just something all social media platforms have to do. Ways in which you can report a different account, an algorithm can check it, a person can check it, you can get accounts banned for certain cases like this. This isn't something that we had a few years ago, right? Maybe 10, 15 years ago, maybe as social media was coming out, we didn't have any of this. So I'm very much of the opinion that I don't entirely agree with you, Adi, because I do agree that I don't have any particular idea as to how we can regulate social media. But I think in a sort of deontological sense, right, you'd essentially say, hey, why do we want to give up on the idea of social media? Because this inherent flaw is, I mean, there certainly is a flaw over here, but isn't there should be some way to adapt a lot of these circumstances, especially considering the huge benefits that social media has brought, right? And either which way, not just completely shutting down all social media seems impractical, especially since if one country does it, other countries like, say, China might take over and would essentially have a huge advantage in a lot of these circumstances. All of that might happen. And I think that social media aids free speech, and saying that, hey, identity theft is worsened and it's a horrible thing. And I agree with you, but just saying that and kind of giving up on social media might be an issue here. And that's where I'm in disagreement. But I'm actually of you, Adi.
Actually, I totally agree with what Adi was saying. It's a problem which we actually can't solve. And identity theft, it's actually not new. It has I think it has been before from 1998 when even Congress passed Identity Theft and Assumption Act, if I'm right. It's they passed it on 1998, and this identity theft is actually more vulnerable on social media, 100%. That's why we're talking about this. So talking about this, I think as we are focusing on to providing proper solutions for issues we talk about social media, I think talking about identity theft is kind of a waste of time, because you can't basically ask everyone to just go off from social media. That's totally impossible. You can't even make your friend reduce his screen time. That's what I'm saying.
So
Yeah. Clarify one thing about
Yeah.
person. I'm not saying that we completely abandon the idea that identity theft exists, and hence we should. I mean, there's nothing we can do about it. Screw it, and then we can just continue with how life goes on. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that I feel that I think there are already sorts of measures in place to sort of reduce or minimize the effects or minimize the number of identity theft. I mean, especially with creating duplicate accounts or creating things like that. I feel that it's already. I agree with you. We can find ways to adapt solutions to decrease this, or we can find ways to sort of remedy this problem. But at the same time, I feel that it's still a problem that I'm not even particular to social media. It's going to be a problem that exists when you're in a community anywhere. There's always going to be cases where um, there's always going to be cases where someone who sorry there's always going to be cases where someone is not going to where someone doesn't exactly isn't exactly who they say they are, or things like that. But at the same time, I'm not saying that we completely abandon social media. I'm sure that if we come up with solutions, that would be great. But I still feel that, actually, I'd like to see what Arnav has to say about it.
Yeah.
Arnav, go
The
ahead.
thing is, we can't neglect the fact that identity theft, intellectual property theft has always existed. It's something that's been around, since prehistoric times. But there's something that can be done about it. A positive example of this is Discord, where on Discord you have a number next to your username, a unique number, which can be used as like a key to identify you as a certain user. We've seen this recently as well with verification ticks. However, it's not enough. Obviously, we still have. I think all of us have encountered issues where we've seen duplicate accounts of ourselves or duplicate accounts of our friends being created, or getting catfished online. It's something that happens a lot.
How does that number thing work exactly?
Yeah, on Discord, I think you probably noticed as well. I know
But
you
like,
use
how is it
Discord.
different from a username?
Similarly, Instagram, everyone can't have. I mean, not everyone has
Can't hear you, Adi.
a unique username.
Adi,
It's like a unique identification.
I think you've closed it. Like,
Adi,
Yeah, so Harsh, basically how the whole identification thing works is on Discord, next to your username you have that 4-digit number code, so that's unique for every user, and so that's something that can be implemented.
From a username?
Hmm?
How is that different from a username? Even usernames have to be unique, right?
Yeah, but the problem with usernames, and we notice this a lot, is that slight differences. So say you can add an extra bullet or an extra point, like an extra full stop, or an extra letter somewhere here and there. It's far easier to identify when you have something as simple as, say, like a multiple digit code, than you do as it's like a username. Because
So the code is not.
the way that the human mind works, it's we simplify things, and so sometimes we don't notice small differences.
No, but the code in this case isn't shown to everyone else, but Discord notices it. Is that what you're saying?
oh, it's shown
No. It's shown to everyone else. It's shown to everyone else. You can you hover over someone's profile, you'll see a code right next to their username. So that's something that more platforms should implement. It's something that's obviously very good, and it provides a sense of individuality, and it also prevents identity theft in the sense you can easily verify who is who and whether that's actually their account.
That's understood, Arnav. So we have 8 minutes of discussion left. So me and Harshad would both like to go ahead with the course of action. So I'll let Harshad take over from here.
Okay, so what we're looking for is a course of action. As we mentioned before, we want to identify methods through which we can maximize social media's benefits and minimize its costs. And we can also, we also want to think about ways to implement that solution, because implementing is also very important. So we should consider the factors which or other issues which may arise when we're trying to implement the solution.
So how we would like to go about this is, can all the speakers here list a few benefits of social media that they've observed personally?
Well, I wouldn't say it's just a benefit personally, if you're okay with me starting, but it's not only a benefit, but it's also a disadvantage. But the idea that that concepts and ideas can just go through large groups of people much faster, and they have the ability to, you can say, go viral, but essentially be shared with a larger number of people. I think that's a huge advantage, as well as a disadvantage in the fact that like the whole the misquotation of Winston Churchill saying that by the time the truth goes out, sorry, the truth the whatever the I don't know what I was going to say. Fine, fair enough. Go ahead.
Would anyone else like to add anything?
Yeah, it's without we're in an age of information, where um now you can find out anything, or yeah, you can find out everything about anything. And what that's done is it's provided a lot of awareness about things that without social media we would never know about. You go back to some of the instances that we've seen about people being discriminated, and having those recordings, and those incidents, and but the most recent example with SARS in Nigeria. The existence of a platform like social media has brought around a lot more awareness to such issues, and it's allowed us to be more aware as a society, and also to try and make a difference and have an easier way of making a difference with that social platform that exists in social media.
Also, guys, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to jump in again. The quote the misquote actually is that a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to get its pants on, and I think that's quite fair and apt in this situation. Anyway, go on. So sorry.
So I feel like we've got enough advantages from both Arnav and Harsh. We'd like to move on to the disadvantages that you feel we have discussed in this panel discussion so far.
Yeah. So I feel that on top of, I mean, we've been talking about a lot of disadvantages, but just to highlight a few, we talked about how social media is a sort of this epistemic bubble where we are interacting with like-minded people, we're interacting with like-minded content, which just reinforces what we believe in, which doesn't really do justice to age of information where we're learning new things. So I just feel that that's one drawback to social media. Another thing that we talked about is how social media affects the whole idea of people. Social media affects one of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is self-esteem, where we've seen reports that social media has been linked to depression and anxiety. It has effect on, especially with Sarah talked about the new generation. It's been affecting social media affects the mental state of the youth today. And we've also talked about. Does anyone else like to add anything? I don't know. We also talked about how social media could also. I'm glad. Anyone else, please add.
Any of the speakers are allowed to add.
Yeah. Anyone?
The usage
The
of drugs,
anxiety point entirely, and the
drug
authoritarian.
trafficking. I mean, we didn't touch that point, but we vaguely crossed the borderline of that.
Bumped into it, kind of.
Yeah, kind of bumped into it. I think Adi pretty much covered everything else.
Oh, and we talked about the inherent flaws of how, like, for example, social media is as social as how social we are. Just to make it simpler, social media wouldn't be social media if it weren't for the people interacting on it. And I feel that some onus has to be put on the way we interact with each other that causes social media to be so mind-numbing, so addictive, and having such an effect on our emotional and mental state. For example, having parasocial interaction, having parasocial relationships, having pseudo communities, having communities of cultural tribe. Online tribalism on social media, making things going viral, virality, the whole concept of virality, as well as, and we must also understand that social media is so attractive to us because it it satisfies a lot of our needs that we have, especially with quoting the uses in gratification theory. We've been talking where social media has done a lot, especially the reason we use it is because it kind of it satisfies what we're looking for, especially with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It kind of ticks all of those boxes, and that's why social media is so attractive to, along with the viewers, the people, our friends who are on social media, who interact with each other. The whole the reason and the way social media was built also solves a lot of these needs that we have.
Yeah, I agree with you, Adi. So with that from most of the speakers, I would like to say that with these advantages and disadvantages, there are always ways that we can avoid the disadvantages and add on to the advantages. What me and Harshit both think together is that social media is a good thing. It certainly has helped the world, certainly helped how individuals think and how fast information travels. However, there is misinformation which can only be prevented individually by ourselves and how we look at data. And I feel like the way to minimize and maximize the potential of social media is to educate ourselves. We If we want to come to use social medias, we have to come to terms with how they work, and it all comes down to how much you depend on these big corporations and how much you feel like uh, you're protected by privacy. Would anyone else like to add on to that before we wrap up?
Another thing I would like to add is for cursive action is because of the advancements which have made in technology recently, where we are able to send data across faster because of 5G technologies, we're able our phones and other devices are able to process data much faster. The main issue here is companies having access to our data, them storing our data and using it for their future needs, and not only for advertising. There are cases where companies have sold our data and have used it in the long term. So what I potentially think we could do to prevent this is process that data internally and have these algorithms run on our devices and don't send the data to anyone else. So the corporations do not have access to this data. So government regulations could be put in place to prevent this. That is one of the solutions I thought maybe could be effective.
Yeah, that's a really cool perspective, Harshit, and it's something that I really haven't considered at all. And we could talk about that, but I guess we have to wrap up.
Yeah, we have to
In a
wrap up.
weird sense, I'd like to mention something, please, Dhruv.
Yeah, mention it. Just
In a weird
last
sense,
last statement.
in trying to figure out the solutions to how we can make sure that debate and things like that are better on social media, to ensure that all these biases don't creep in, things like that. In a sense, we've solved that with what you've set up over here, you and Harshit have set up over here, because really we are having quite open discussion and whatnot, and it doesn't really feel like we're screaming at each other. Maybe I'm completely blind to this and whatnot, but I really think that this was a productive discussion. Even if we didn't actually come up with anything, at least we were able to discuss things, uh, criticize and work on our own ideas. So I think this might be something like this. We should organize it a little bit more often, and I really hope that you do something like that. But great initiative.
Yeah, thank you, Harsh. I'll be wrapping up the live. I'd like you guys to stay back for